Millionaire sees homeless boy feeding his wheelchair-bound daughter, and it changes his life. Robert Thompson watched anxiously as doctors came and went from his only daughter Emma's hospital room. The 2-year-old suffered from a rare, neurological condition that confined her to a wheelchair, and in recent weeks she had refused to eat, keeping everyone in their luxurious mansion on constant alert. It was then that he remembered that scene in Central Park, New York, which now felt so distant. The millionaire had been hiding behind a tree watching his daughter, who had gone to the park with her nanny. Robert saw when a dark-skinned, skinny boy wearing nothing but tattered jean shorts approached Emma with a piece of bread in his hand. The nanny, Megan, was distracted on her phone, and before Robert could shout, the boy was already feeding small pieces of bread to his daughter. "Who do you think you are, touching my daughter?" Robert yelled, rushing toward the children. "You could be dirty, full of diseases." The boy, who couldn't have been more than 4 years old, widened his frightened eyes as Robert roughly pushed him away from Emma's wheelchair. The nanny, now alert, looked confused and ashamed for being caught neglecting her duty. "Forgive me, Mr. Thompson, I only looked away for a second," Megan pleaded, while Robert checked on Emma. "You're fired," he declared, without glancing at the nanny. "Get your things from the mansion today." Megan began to cry, but Robert ignored her. His attention was fixed on the boy, who still held the bread in his hand. An elderly woman, thin and with skin wrinkled by the sun, hurried toward them. "I'm sorry, sir," the woman said breathlessly. "Tommy meant no harm. He just wanted to share the bread we got today." Robert looked at the woman and the boy with disdain. "Keep that kid away from my daughter," he warned, lifting Emma into her wheelchair. "Let's get out of this place." As the chauffeur drove Robert and Emma away, the millionaire gazed through the tinted window of the imported car. He saw the boy named Tommy holding the woman's hand, likely his grandmother, both watching the car leave. What puzzled him, however, was noticing that Emma was also looking back, as if searching for the boy who had fed her. It was the first time in weeks his daughter had shown interest in anything or anyone. In the days that followed, Emma's condition worsened significantly. Robert hired the best specialists in the country, but none could get the girl to eat properly. She turned her face away from anyone who tried to feed her, including her own father. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk," said Dr. Jennifer Wilson, the neurologist who had been treating Emma since her diagnosis. "Your daughter's condition is deteriorating due to her refusal to eat. If this continues, we'll have to consider a feeding tube." Robert ran his hands through his graying hair in frustration. "Do whatever's necessary, doctor. Money isn't an issue," he replied, as he always did when it came to Emma's health. Dr. Wilson, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes, hesitated. "Mr. Thompson, this isn't just a medical issue. Your daughter seems sad. Children, even with neurological limitations like Emma's, respond to affection, to human connection." Robert narrowed his eyes defensively. "Are you implying I don't give my daughter enough affection?" he asked irritably. "Not at all," the doctor replied calmly. "I'm only saying that perhaps Emma needs something we haven't been able to identify yet." After the doctor left, Robert stood alone in the grand office of his Upper East Side mansion, New York's most prestigious neighborhood. At 52, he had built an empire in the construction industry, but ever since Catherine, his wife, left him shortly after Emma was born, it seemed like nothing in his life was going right. Michael, the driver who had worked for the family for over a decade, knocked on the office door. "Excuse me, sir," he said, stepping in cautiously. "May I speak with you?" Robert gestured for him to enter, barely interested. "It's about little Emma," Michael continued. "I've been watching her. Well, she can't stop looking out the window whenever we pass by Central Park." "So what?" Robert asked, annoyed by the intrusion. "Well, I was thinking about that day with the boy. The young miss smiled when he gave her food, didn't she? I've never seen her smile like that before." Robert fell silent for a moment, recalling the scene. It was true. Emma had smiled when that street boy approached her. "What are you suggesting, Michael?" he asked, calmer now. Maybe we could find the boy again, see if he has any effect on Emma?" Robert laughed dismissively. "Are you crazy? Bring some street kid near my daughter again? Absolutely not." Michael lowered his head, resigned, and left the office. But the seed of doubt had already been planted in Robert's mind. What if that boy really was special to Emma? What if he was the key to getting her to eat again? That night, as he unsuccessfully tried to get Emma to take a few spoonfuls of porridge, Robert noticed something different in his daughter's expression. It wasn't rejection or apathy like in recent days. It was longing. How could a 2-year-old with neurological limitations miss someone she had only seen once? "Emma, sweetheart, you need to eat," he pleaded, but the little girl turned her face away again. That was when the decision formed in his mind. He had to find that boy, if only to prove himself wrong. The next morning, Robert called Michael into his office. "I want you to find that boy from the park," he said bluntly. "The one named Tommy, bring him here." Michael couldn't hide his surprise. "Are you sure, sir?" "No, I'm not," Robert admitted, "but I don't know what else to do." Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. Michael spent the next 2 days frequenting Central Park, searching for the boy and his grandmother. Finally, on the afternoon of the 3rd day, he found them. They were sitting on a bench, sharing a small packet of crackers. "Excuse me," Michael approached gently. "Do you remember me?" "I'm Mr. Robert Thompson's driver." The elderly woman protectively tightened her grip on the boy's arm. "What do you want with us?" she asked suspiciously. "Your boss has already caused enough trouble." Michael knelt to be at Tommy's eye level. "Hey there, little buddy. Do you remember that little girl in the wheelchair? Emma?" The boy's eyes lit up in recognition. "The girl who didn't talk?" he asked in his childlike voice. "She liked my bread." "Yes, that's the one," Michael confirmed, smiling. "She's sick, you know. She won't eat anything. The doctors are very worried." The woman eyed Michael skeptically, but he could see concern in her gaze. "What does that have to do with us?" she asked. "Well, Mr. Robert, my boss would like Tommy to come visit Emma. Maybe she'll eat if he offers her something." Tommy's grandmother let out a bitter laugh. "First he treats us like trash. Now he wants our help?" she asked indignantly. Michael sighed. "Mrs. Eleanor Baker." "Mrs. Eleanor, I understand your anger, but this is a sick child. Emma could get worse if she doesn't eat soon." Mrs. Eleanor looked at her grandson, who seemed puzzled by the adult's conversation. "Is the little girl sick, Grandma?" Tommy asked, concerned. "I can give her my bread again." Mrs. Eleanor's heart tightened. As much as she hated the idea of helping that arrogant rich man, she couldn't deny help to a sick child, especially when her grandson seemed so eager to assist. "All right," she finally agreed, "but you'll take us there and bring us back. And if your boss treats my grandson poorly again, we'll never come back." Michael nodded, relieved. "Deal. Can you come with me now? The car is right there." He pointed to the limousine parked near Central Park. Tommy had never ridden in such a big, luxurious car before. His eyes scanned every detail of the limo's interior as Michael drove toward the mansion in the Upper East Side. "Grandma, look at all these buttons," the boy exclaimed, pointing to the air conditioning control panel. Mrs. Eleanor smiled at her grandson's excitement, but her expression turned serious again when the limousine stopped in front of the grand gate of the Thompson mansion. When they entered, they were greeted by Robert in the living room. The man looked years older since their meeting in the park. Deep bags under his eyes marked his face, and his clothes, though expensive, appeared wrinkled. "Thank you for coming," he said, avoiding direct eye contact with Mrs. Eleanor or Tommy. "Emma is in her room. Please follow me." The trio followed Robert through the mansion's lavish hallways until they reached a bedroom decorated with childish motifs, though it now resembled a small medical unit. Monitoring equipment surrounded a bed where Emma lay, pale and with dull eyes. A nurse was unsuccessfully trying to get her to eat some soup. "She hasn't eaten anything since yesterday," the nurse said, worried. Tommy timidly approached the bed. "Hi, little girl," he said in his childlike voice. "Are you sick?" To everyone's surprise, Emma turned her face toward Tommy. Her eyes, once lifeless, seemed to regain a spark. Robert gestured to the nurse, who handed him the bowl of soup. "Do you think you can get her to eat?" he asked, passing the bowl to Tommy. The boy nodded confidently and took the spoon. Carefully, he brought it to Emma's lips. "Look at this. Yummy food," he said, smiling. "Let's eat together. A little for you, a little for me." To the astonishment of everyone in the room, Emma opened her mouth and accepted the spoonful of soup. Tommy, true to his word, took a small sip from the same bowl. "Tastes good, right?" he asked. And Emma made a small sound that seemed like agreement. Spoonful after spoonful, Tommy managed to get Emma to eat nearly the entire bowl. With each bite she took, Robert's expression shifted from disbelief to hope. When Emma finally refused more food, Tommy set the bowl aside and smiled at her. "You ate it all. Now you'll get strong," he said, gently touching the girl's arm. Emma, to everyone's complete surprise, especially her father's, gave a small smile. The nurse, a middle-aged woman named Nancy, couldn't hold back her tears. "This is incredible," she said. "She hasn't smiled like that in weeks." Robert was speechless. How could this boy, whom he had treated so poorly, establish a connection that even he, her own father, couldn't? "Thank you," he finally said to Tommy. You've helped my daughter so much." Mrs. Eleanor watched the scene with a heavy heart. As much as she wanted to hate that arrogant rich man, seeing her grandson help a sick child softened her. "She just needed a little friend," she murmured. "Sometimes that's all we need, someone who truly sees us." Mrs. Eleanor's words hit Robert like a punch. He had spent so much time searching for medical cures, expensive treatments, renowned specialists that he had forgotten his daughter was, above all, a child who needed not just medical care, but also affection, human connection. Could you come back tomorrow?" asked Robert hesitantly. "I think Emma would. Like that." Before Mrs. Elizabeth could respond, Tommy was already nodding enthusiastically. "I want to play with Emma," he exclaimed. "Can I come tomorrow, Grandma?" Mrs. Elizabeth looked at her grandson and then at Emma, who seemed more alive than when they had arrived. "We can," she agreed finally, "but only if Mr. Thompson sends Michael to pick us up. We don't have money for a cab and the bus takes too long." Of course," Robert quickly agreed. "Michael will pick you up every day if you'd like. In fact," he hesitated as if considering something, "perhaps we could arrange something more permanent." Mrs. Elizabeth narrowed her eyes, suspicious. "What kind of arrangement?" "Well, Emma clearly responds well to your grandson's presence. Maybe we could hire you to come daily. I'd pay well, of course." Mrs. Elizabeth thought it over for a moment. "We'll see," she replied finally. "For now, let's take it one day at a time." When Michael took Mrs. Elizabeth and Tommy back to Central Park, Robert stayed by Emma's bedside watching his daughter, who for the first time in weeks seemed to sleep peacefully. "Who would have thought, my princess," he murmured, stroking the girl's blonde hair. "That little boy achieved what no doctor could." In the days that followed, a routine developed. Michael picked up Mrs. Elizabeth and Tommy every morning and brought them to the mansion. There, Tommy spent hours with Emma, feeding her, playing simple games with her, telling made-up stories in his childish language. Emma flourished each day. She began eating regularly. Her sleep improved and she even made small motor progress, moving her arms more forcefully to reach for Tommy when he stepped away. Robert watched from a distance, still unable to fully understand the bond between the two children, but deeply grateful for it. He also grew curious about Mrs. Elizabeth and Tommy, asking about their lives, how they'd ended up on the streets, what they needed. "My son, Tommy's father, he left us when he found out his wife was pregnant," Mrs. Elizabeth explained one day as they had coffee in the mansion's kitchen. "His mother lasted until the boy was 2. Then she said she wasn't cut out to be a mother and disappeared. Since then, it's just been the 2 of us." "And how do you get by?" Robert asked, genuinely interested. "I collect recyclables when my legs allow it," she replied with dignity. "And some kind folks give us food now and then. We live in a tiny room in a squat in the Bronx." Robert felt a pang of shame. He, who had more money than he could spend in several lifetimes, had never truly cared about people like Mrs. Elizabeth and Tommy before the incident in the park. "Mrs. Elizabeth, I was thinking," he began hesitantly. Why don't you and Tommy stay here? I have plenty of empty rooms, and Emma clearly loves having the boy around." The old woman looked at him suspiciously. "Why?" she asked bluntly. "Why? Would you, who treated us like trash that day in the park, now want to give us a roof?" Robert sighed deeply. "Because I was wrong," he admitted, the words seeming hard to say. "I judged you by appearances, by social status. And now I see your grandson has something no money can buy, the ability to bring my daughter back to life." Mrs. Elizabeth considered his words for a moment. "We don't want charity, Mr. Thompson," she finally said. "If we stay, it has to be a fair arrangement. I can work. I was a housekeeper when I was younger." Robert nodded, respecting the woman's dignity. "Of course, you can be our housekeeper, and Tommy will be, well, Emma's special friend. You'll have your own space in the house and a fair wage." Before they could continue, they were interrupted by a scream from Emma's room. They rushed there and found Nurse Nancy staring in amazement at the children. "Mr. Thompson, look!" she exclaimed, pointing at Emma. The girl was in her wheelchair, and for the first time she was moving the wheels with her own hands, following Tommy as he walked back and forth across the room, showing her toys. She's never done this before," said Robert, his voice choked with emotion. "Children are capable of miracles when given the right encouragement," remarked Mrs. Baker, smiling at the scene. "It seems Emma has found her motivation." That night, after much discussion, Mrs. Baker accepted Robert's proposal. She and Tommy would move into the mansion, where they would have a small attached apartment. She would work as the housekeeper, and Tommy would continue to be Emma's companion, now full-time. "We'll need to get our things," said Mrs. Baker. "Of course, Michael will take you tomorrow," replied Robert. The next day, when Michael arrived with Mrs. Baker and Tommy at the small tenement in the Bronx, the driver was shocked by their living conditions. A single tiny room, no private bathroom, a mattress on the floor, and a few cardboard boxes holding their meager belongings. "This is where you live?" asked Michael, unable to hide his surprise. "Yes," Mrs. Baker replied with dignity. "It's not much, but it's clean and it's ours." Tommy ran to one of the boxes and pulled out a broken plastic toy car, his only toy. "I'll show it to Emma," he exclaimed excitedly. As he helped load Mrs. Baker and Tommy's few possessions into the car, Michael noticed an old yellowed photograph. It showed a young woman, who appeared to be Mrs. Baker decades earlier, wearing a housekeeper's uniform, standing beside an elegant woman in front of a mansion that looked strangely familiar. "This house," Michael began, puzzled. "It looks like Mr. Thompson's mansion." Mrs. Baker quickly took the photo and tucked it into her worn-out bag. "That was another life," she said curtly. "Let's go." On the way back, Michael couldn't stop thinking about that photograph. There was something odd about it, some connection he couldn't quite grasp. When they arrived at the mansion, they were greeted by a visibly anxious Robert. "Emma hasn't stopped asking for Tommy all day," he said, helping unload the boxes. "I've never seen her so talkative." Tommy ran inside, eager to show his toy car to his new friend. Mrs. Baker watched the scene with a mix of joy and worry. The children were forming a strong bond, and she feared what would happen if, for some reason, they had to be separated in the future. As they settled into the small attached apartment, which was larger and more luxurious than anywhere Mrs. Baker and Tommy had lived before, the elderly woman couldn't help but dwell on the past, on the strange coincidences in life that had brought her back to this place she had sworn never to set foot in again. "Grandma, look at all this space," Tommy exclaimed, exploring their new home. "I have my own bed." Mrs. Baker smiled, pushing away painful memories. "Yes, my dear. Now we have a better place to stay." In the weeks that followed, a remarkable transformation took place, not just in Emma, but in the entire atmosphere of the mansion. What was once a cold and sterile environment, dominated by medical equipment and distant healthcare professionals, was now full of life and children's laughter. Emma was making remarkable progress. She began to speak more, small words at first, then short sentences. Her physical strength improved daily, and she could now move around in her wheelchair for much of the house, always following Tommy on his adventures. Robert, in turn, started spending more time at home. He delegated more responsibilities at his company so he could be present and witness his daughter's progress. Slowly, he also grew closer to Tommy, whom he had initially treated with a mix of gratitude and distance, but now was beginning to see almost as a son. Mrs. Eleanor took charge of the house with the efficiency of someone who already knew that world well. Within a few days, the staff, previously demotivated by the heavy atmosphere, responded positively to her gentle yet firm leadership. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now continuing, it was during dinner, 1 month after Mrs. Eleanor and Tommy had moved into the mansion, that the past finally came to light. They were all at the large dining table, a rare occasion, since Robert usually ate alone in his office and Emma in her room with the nurse. "Tommy, don't use so much sauce," Mrs. Eleanor gently warned. "Let him be, Mrs. Eleanor," Robert said, smiling. "Kids need to make a mess sometimes." The elderly woman looked at him with an enigmatic expression. "You didn't always think that way," she remarked before she could stop herself. Robert frowned, confused. "What do you mean?" Mrs. Eleanor hesitated, as if wrestling with whether to continue. "Never mind, I'm sorry," she finally replied. "Sometimes age makes me say nonsense." But Robert wasn't convinced. There was something in her gaze, a familiarity he couldn't explain. "Mrs. Eleanor, have we met before?" he asked directly. "I have the feeling that—" "Dessert is ready," she interrupted, standing up quickly. "I made that pudding Tommy and Emma love." The subject was temporarily forgotten as the children enjoyed the pudding, but the doubt lingered in Robert's mind. That night, after the children were asleep, Robert went to Mrs. Eleanor's room in the attached apartment. He knocked lightly on the door. "Can we talk?" he asked when she opened the door, already dressed in a simple robe. Mrs. Eleanor sighed deeply, as if she knew this moment would come eventually. "Come in," she invited, opening the door wider. The apartment was simple but cozy. Mrs. Eleanor had decorated the space with the few personal belongings she had, including some photographs. It was one of those framed photos on the wall that immediately caught Robert's attention, the same one Michael had noticed days earlier. A much younger Mrs. Eleanor, dressed as a housekeeper, standing beside an elegant woman in front of a mansion. This is my mother," Robert exclaimed, stepping closer to the photograph. "And this house is—" "This very mansion, yes," Mrs. Eleanor confirmed, sitting in an armchair. "I was the housekeeper here for nearly 20 years. I served your mother, Mrs. Elizabeth, from before you were born until the incident." Robert turned to her, stunned by the revelation. "What incident?" he asked, his voice almost a whisper. "I don't remember you." "You were only 10 when I left," she explained. "Your mother dismissed me when she found out I was letting you play with my son, Brian." "Brian," Robert repeated, searching his memories. "I had a friend by that name. We used to play hide and seek in the backyard garden." Mrs. Eleanor nodded with a sad smile. "Yes, you were inseparable, but your mother didn't think it was proper for the boss's son to mix with the maid's son. When she found us, I was fired that same day. No references, no notice, nothing." Robert sat down slowly, absorbing the revelation. "And Brian is—" "Tommy's father." "Yes," Mrs. Eleanor confirmed. "He never got over the humiliation of that day. He grew up full of bitterness and resentment, became a bitter man who abandoned his own family." Robert covered his face with his hands. "My God, so all of this, Tommy being the only one who can help Emma, is this some kind of coincidence? Fate?" Mrs. Eleanor finished. "I can't say. All I know is when I saw you in that park, treating my grandson the same way your mother treated my son decades ago, it felt like time hadn't passed at all, like the cycle was repeating. But now it's different," Robert said, looking at her. "Now I see the mistake. I see how wrong I was." Mrs. Eleanor studied him for a long moment. "Yes, you've changed. But the question is, will this change last? Or when Emma fully recovers, will you go back to being the man I met in the park?" The question hung in the air, heavy and challenging. Robert didn't have an immediate answer. Instead, he asked another question. "Why did you agree to come here knowing who I was?" Mrs. Eleanor smiled softly. "For Tommy." He took to your daughter from the very first moment, and maybe, for an old hope, that the past could be redeemed. That the cycle could be broken. Robert fell silent for a long time, processing everything he'd heard. Finally, he stood and walked to the door. "Thank you for telling me this, Mrs. Eleanor. I promise I won't repeat my mother's mistakes. Tommy and you are part of our family now." The elderly woman nodded without another word. When Robert left, she looked at the photograph on the wall and murmured to herself, "Only time will tell, my son. Only time will tell." In the days that followed, Robert seemed different, more introspective, more present. He started actively joining in the games between Emma and Tommy, something he'd never done before. He began asking more about Mrs. Eleanor's past, about the years she'd worked for his family, about what he himself had been like as a child. "You were a sweet boy," Mrs. Eleanor told him one afternoon as they watched the children play in the garden. "Before your mother started molding you in her image." "How so?" Robert asked, genuinely curious. "Mrs. Elizabeth was a difficult woman, obsessed with status, with appearances. After your father died, she got even worse. It was like she wanted to turn you into the perfect version of an heir." Robert nodded slowly, remembering his mother's rigidity, the endless etiquette rules, the constant demands for perfection. "And I ended up becoming exactly what she wanted," he concluded with a heavy sigh. "Not completely," Mrs. Eleanor disagreed. "You're here now, aren't you? Acknowledging your mistakes, trying to be a better father to Emma. Your mother would never have been capable of that." The conversation was interrupted by excited shouts from the garden. Emma had managed to stand up from her wheelchair and, leaning on Tommy, was taking shaky steps across the grass. "Daddy, look!" she called in her childlike voice. "I'm walking!" Robert ran to his daughter, tears in his eyes. He knelt in front of her and hugged her carefully. "You're walking, my princess," he exclaimed, emotional. "You're amazing." Emma smiled proudly. "Tommy helped me. He said I could do it." Robert looked at the boy, who watched the scene with a shy smile. "Thank you, Tommy," he said, reaching out to pull him into the hug. "You're a very special boy." That night, after putting Emma to sleep, Robert found Tommy still awake, sitting on the porch of the guest apartment. "Can't sleep, champ?" he asked, sitting beside him. "I'm thinking about Emma," the boy replied. "She'll be able to play more now that she's walking a little." Robert smiled, touched by the boy's genuine concern. "You know, Tommy, you changed Emma's life. You changed mine too." The boy looked at him, confused. "I just gave her some bread," he said simply. "It was much more than that," Robert answered. "You gave her something all the doctors and all my money couldn't. Sincere friendship." Tommy smiled, not fully understanding what Robert meant, but happy with the praise. "Can I live here forever?" he asked hesitantly. "Me and Grandma?" "Of course you can," Robert replied without hesitation. "This is your home now." The next day, Robert surprised everyone by announcing he was taking an extended leave from his company. For the first time in years, he decided his priority would be his family. Not just Emma, but also Tommy and Mrs. Eleanor, who had become an essential part of his life. "I'm thinking of taking the kids to the beach house in the Hamptons," he said during breakfast. "The sea air will be good for Emma, and Tommy's probably never seen the ocean." Mrs. Eleanor watched him with a mix of surprise and approval. "That's a wonderful idea," she agreed. "The kids will love it." During breakfast, Robert's phone rang insistently. It was Richard, his right-hand man at the company, with urgent news about an important deal. "Can I call you back later?" Robert asked, surprising Richard. "I'm in the middle of breakfast with my family." When he hung up, he noticed everyone at the table staring at him in shock. In the past, Robert would have interrupted any meal, any family moment, to take work calls. "What?" he asked, picking up a piece of toast. "Is there a problem?" "With wanting to have breakfast with you all." Mrs. Eleanor smiled, pleased. "No problem, we're just getting used to the new Robert. The trip to the beach house was planned for the end of that week." Tommy was especially excited, counting down the days until he'd see the ocean for the first time. Emma was also enthusiastic, constantly asking about the fish and seashells they might find. The night before their departure, as everyone packed, the doorbell rang. Michael went to answer it and returned with a troubled expression. "Mr. Thompson, there's a woman here insisting on speaking with you. She says she's Tommy's mother." Silence fell over the room. Mrs. Eleanor paled, and Robert felt a tightness in his chest. How had she found them? Why would she show up now, after all this time? "Where is she?" he asked, trying to stay calm. "In the sitting room," Michael replied. "Should I call Mrs. Eleanor?" Robert thought for a moment. "No, let me talk to her first. Don't say anything to Tommy yet." When he entered the sitting room, Robert saw a young woman, no older than 30, with features resembling Tommy's, but a hardened expression on her face. She wore simple but well-kept clothes. "I'm Robert Thompson," he introduced himself. "What can I do for you?" The woman stared at him with a mix of defiance and nervousness. "My name is Jessica. I'm Pedro's mother. I've come to take him back." A chill ran down Robert's spine. "How did you know he was here?" he asked, buying time to gather his thoughts. "A neighbor from the settlement saw your driver picking up my mother and my son," she explained. It wasn't hard to figure out where the great Robert Thompson lived. There was bitterness in her voice, a mix of envy and resentment. "You abandoned your son," Robert said bluntly. "Why come back now?" Jessica shrugged, uncomfortable. "He's my son. I have the right to see him whenever I want." "And what changed? Why do you want him back now?" The woman averted her gaze. "My life is more stable now. I got a job. I have a decent place to live." Robert wasn't convinced. There was something more to it. "How much?" he asked directly. "What?" Jessica seemed offended. "How much do you want to let him stay with us?" Robert clarified. "I imagine you found out your son is living in a millionaire's mansion. What you really want isn't your son. It's money." Jessica's expression hardened, but she didn't deny the accusation. "You don't know anything about me," she said defensively. "Tommy is my son, and I'm taking him with me, unless you want to make a deal." "What kind of deal?" Robert asked, already knowing the answer. "Financial help, something to help me start over. Let's say $100,000? Robert looked at her with a mix of pity and disdain. It was exactly what he suspected. "Do you know what your son meant to us?" he asked, keeping his voice calm. "He saved my daughter, literally brought her back to life." Jessica seemed uninterested. "Good for your daughter. 100,000 is nothing to you, Mr. Thompson. A small price to keep your daughter's savior close, don't you think?" Before Robert could answer, the living room door opened. Mrs. Eleanor walked in, her face a mask of disappointment as she saw her daughter. "So this is what you came here for, Jessica? To sell your own son?" Jessica seemed to shrink under her mother's gaze. "Mom, it's not like that." "Don't lie to me," Mrs. Eleanor interrupted. "You abandoned your son for 2 years. 2 years, not a single call, not a single visit. Now you show up when you think you can profit from him?" Robert watched the interaction between mother and daughter, sensing the deep hurt in Mrs. Eleanor. "Jessica, can I make a different offer?" he interjected. Both women looked at him. "I won't give you $100,000 to disappear from Tommy's life," he said firmly. "That would just continue a cycle of abandonment and neglect that's already done enough damage." Jessica opened her mouth to protest, but he raised his hand, asking for silence. "Instead, I'm offering you a job at one of my companies. A fair salary, benefits, room to grow, and the chance to slowly rebuild a relationship with your son, under Mrs. Eleanor's supervision, of course." Mrs. Eleanor looked at Robert in surprise. It wasn't what she expected. "Why would you do that?" Jessica asked, suspicious. "Because I believe people can change," Robert answered, thinking of his own transformation. "And because Tommy deserves to know his mother, if she's truly willing, to be a mother to him." Jessica seemed speechless. Clearly, this wasn't what she had expected. "Think about it, daughter," Mrs. Eleanor advised, her voice softer now. "It's a chance to do the right thing this time." After a long silence, Jessica spoke. "What if I refuse? What if I insist on taking Tommy with me?" Robert took a deep breath. "Then we'll go to court. I have the resources for the best lawyers in the country, and your mother has proof of your abandonment. But I don't want to do that. I don't want Tommy to go through that trauma." The reality of the situation finally seemed to hit Jessica. Her options were limited, and Robert's offer, though not the easy money she had hoped for, was more than she'd likely get on her own. "What kind of job would it be?" she asked finally. That depends on your skills, Robert replied. What can you do? Jessica hesitated. I worked as a cashier at a supermarket, and I took a secretarial course, but I never got a job in that field. We can start with an administrative position then, Robert suggested, with room for growth, based on your performance. The next few minutes were tense, with Jessica visibly struggling with her decision. Finally, she let out a defeated sigh. All right, I accept your offer, but I want to see my son. Mrs. Elizabeth and Robert exchanged glances. First, we need to prepare him, said Mrs. Elizabeth. He hasn't seen you in 2 years, Jessica. You can't just show up like this. Robert agreed. Here's what we'll do. We'll stick to our plans of going to the beach house. It'll be good for the kids. Meanwhile, you start the job, get settled, and we'll carefully plan how to reintroduce you into Tommy's life. Jessica didn't seem happy about the delay, but reluctantly accepted the terms. When do I come back for more details? Monday, after we return from the beach, Robert replied. Come to my office at this address. He wrote it down on a piece of paper and handed it to her. I'll personally speak to HR about your hiring. After Jessica left, Mrs. Elizabeth collapsed into an armchair, looking exhausted. Thank you, she said, looking at Robert, for not letting her take Tommy. I would never allow that, he answered, sitting beside her. But I also think if she truly wants to change, she deserves a chance, for Tommy's sake. Mrs. Elizabeth nodded slowly. You've really changed, Robert. You're not that arrogant man from the park anymore. Robert smiled sadly. It took a 4-year-old boy to teach me what really matters in life. Better late than never, right? The trip to the beach house went smoothly. Tommy, unaware of the drama surrounding him, was overjoyed at his first sight of the ocean. Emma, inspired by her friend's excitement, was making surprising progress, now able to take several steps without help. Robert watched the children playing in the sand under Mrs. Elizabeth's watchful eye. His heart was filled with a peace he hadn't felt in years, since before Emma was born, since before his wife Catherine left him. As if his thoughts had summoned her, his phone rang. The number was unfamiliar, but something made him answer. Hello? Robert? The woman's voice on the other end was hesitant but unmistakable. It's Catherine. He was momentarily speechless, shocked to hear his ex-wife's voice after so long. How did you get this number? He finally asked. Your assistant gave it to me. Said you were on vacation. You never take vacations, Robert. Is everything okay? Emma? Emma's doing great, he replied, recovering from the initial shock. In fact, she's making incredible progress. She's already taking a few steps on her own. The silence on the other end was heavy with emotion. Really? Catherine's voice was thick. That's wonderful. The doctors said she might never The doctors were wrong, Robert interrupted. Or rather, they didn't account for Tommy. Who's Tommy? Catherine asked, confused. Robert looked toward the beach, where the boy was building a sandcastle with Emma. It's a long story. I had a boy who came into our lives and changed everything. Thanks to him, Emma is finally happy, and so am I. You've changed, Robert, Catherine observed, surprise evident in her voice. You seem different. I am different, he confirmed. I've realized a lot these past few months, including how unfair I was to you. Catherine was silent for a moment. I never thought I'd hear you say that, she finally said. People can change, Catherine. I changed. There was another long silence before Catherine spoke again. I'm coming back to New York next week. I'd like to see Emma, if you'll allow it. Robert didn't hesitate. Of course you can see her. She's your daughter too. In fact, I think it would be really good for her. Thank you. Catherine's gratitude was palpable. I'll call when I arrive, and Robert, I'm glad you found some peace. After hanging up, Robert stood still for a moment, absorbing the unexpected conversation. So many changes in such a short time. It was as if the universe was realigning everything in his life. He walked to the beach and sat beside Mrs. Eleanor, who was knitting while watching the children. That was Catherine on the phone, he said, still processing the conversation. She's coming back to the States. She wants to see Emma. Mrs. Eleanor looked at him carefully. And how do you feel about that? Robert thought for a moment. Strangely at peace, he replied honestly. Emma deserves to know her mother, and Catherine. She didn't leave Emma because she didn't love her. She left because she couldn't bear to see how obsessed I was with fixing our daughter, instead of simply loving her as she is. You've really changed, Robert," Mrs. Eleanor said with a gentle smile. "And this change came from within. It took a little boy to awaken something that was already inside you, just asleep." Robert looked at Tommy, who was now helping. Emma placed shells on top of their sandcastle. "You know, when he approached Emma that day in the park, my first instinct was distrust, fear. Now I realize it was just my own prejudices talking. All he wanted was to share his bread with someone who looked sad. Such a simple lesson in generosity, and yet so profound." The days at the beach passed quietly, full of discoveries for the children and reflection for the adults. Emma continued making surprising progress, not just physically, but in her communication and social interactions too. The bond between her and Tommy grew stronger each day, a pure, selfless friendship. That touched the hearts of everyone who witnessed it. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, continuing. On their last day before returning to New York, while the children slept, exhausted after a day of play, Robert and Mrs. Eleanor sat on the porch of the beach house, watching the ocean under the moonlight. "Tomorrow we return to reality," Robert remarked, sipping his tea. "And we'll have to face Jessica and Catherine." Mrs. Eleanor sighed. "I'm worried about how Tommy will react when he sees his mother again. He was so little when she left. He barely remembers her." "We'll handle it carefully," Robert assured her. "I won't let him suffer more than he already has." They sat in silence for a moment, listening to the waves. "Robert, may I ask you something personal?" Mrs. Eleanor finally said. "Of course. What really happened between you and Catherine? Why did she leave?" Robert took a deep breath, diving into painful memories. "After Emma was born and we got the diagnosis, I became obsessive. I wanted to find a cure, a miracle treatment. I spent fortunes consulting specialists all over the world. It was like I couldn't accept that my daughter wouldn't be normal." He paused, feeling the weight of his actions. "Catherine just wanted to love Emma as she was. She said we should focus on her quality of life, her happiness, not on trying to fix her. We had terrible fights about it. I accused her of not caring enough, of giving up on our daughter. But in truth, you were the one who couldn't accept Emma as she was," Mrs. Eleanor added gently. "Exactly," Robert admitted, tears in his eyes. "Catherine couldn't take it anymore. She said I was so obsessed with Emma's condition that I couldn't see her as a child anymore, only as a problem to solve. And she was right." Mrs. Eleanor placed her wrinkled hand over his in comfort. "What matters is that you've realized it now. And that's changing." "Thanks to Tommy," said Robert with a sad smile. "He saw something in Emma that all of us, supposedly wise adults, couldn't see. Simply a child who wanted to be loved and to have a friend." The next morning they returned to New York. The mansion, which had once seemed cold and sterile, was now full of life and color. During their absence, some of the more invasive medical equipment had been removed from Emma's room, replaced with toys and books. "I made a few changes," Robert explained, noticing Mrs. Eleanor's surprised look. "Emma doesn't need to live in a place that feels more like a hospital than a home." The next day, as agreed, Jessica showed up at Robert's company. She was greeted by him personally and taken to the Human Resources Department to begin the hiring process. "Remember," Robert said before leaving her with the HR team, "this is a real chance for a fresh start, not just a financial arrangement." Jessica nodded, looking more composed than during their first meeting. "I understand, and thank you for the opportunity." That same evening, Robert and Mrs. Eleanor spoke to Tommy about his mother. It was a delicate conversation, carefully planned to avoid traumatizing the boy. "Tommy, do you remember your mommy?" Mrs. Eleanor asked gently. The boy seemed thoughtful. "A little," he replied, uncertain. "She had long hair, right?" "Yes, she does," Mrs. Eleanor confirmed. "You know, your mother is back. She really wants to see you." Tommy's eyes widened, a mix of surprise and confusion. Is she gonna take me away? He asked, his small voice betraying his fear. I don't want to leave, Emma. Robert knelt to meet the boy at eye level. No, Tommy, no one's taking you away. This is your home now. Your mother just wants to get to know you better, to see how you're growing up. How would you feel about seeing her? Tommy thought for a moment. Okay, but you and Grandma will stay with me, right? Of course, Mrs. Eleanor assured him, hugging her grandson. We'll always be with you. The meeting between Jessica and Tommy was set for the following Sunday at the mansion. It would be a family lunch with everyone present to support the boy. Robert had insisted that Emma and Mrs. Eleanor be there so Tommy would feel safe. As they prepared for this reunion, another important meeting was approaching. Catherine had arrived in the US and would visit Emma on Friday. Robert was nervous about seeing his ex-wife again. Catherine had changed little in the years since she left. She was still an elegant woman with classic beauty, but there was something different in her eyes, perhaps maturity or simply the effect of time and life's experiences. Are you okay? She asked after their initial greetings. You seem different. Robert smiled faintly. I am different. A lot has changed these past few months. Your secretary mentioned something about a boy living here. And his grandmother. It's a long story, Robert said, but before I tell it, I'm sure you'd like to see Emma. Catherine nodded, emotion flickering across her face. Yes, please. Robert led her to the garden, where Emma was playing, with Tommy. The girl was standing, supported by her walker, laughing as she tried to catch soap bubbles the boy was blowing. Catherine brought her hands to her mouth, tears springing to her eyes instantly. My God, she's standing and laughing. Emma noticed their presence and looked curiously at Catherine. There was no recognition in her eyes, which was to be expected, since Catherine had left when she was just a baby. Emma, this is... Robert hesitated, unsure how to introduce Catherine. Mother? Ex-wife? Visitor? I'm a friend of your dad's, Catherine finished, smiling through her tears. My name is Catherine. I'm so happy to meet you, Emma. Emma smiled timidly. Hi, she said, her voice small but clear. Do you want to play with us? Catherine looked at Robert, silently asking for permission. He nodded, encouraging her. I'd love to play with you, replied Catherine, stepping closer to the children. Tommy, always friendly, immediately handed her the bubble bottle. Do you know how to make big bubbles? He asked excitedly. I can only make tiny ones. Catherine laughed, charmed by the boy's spontaneity. Let's try together, okay? Robert watched the scene with a full heart. Emma, Tommy and Catherine playing together in the garden, laughter echoing through the air, a sight that months ago would have seemed impossible. Mrs. Eleanor joined him, carrying a tray with lemonade and cookies. You did the right thing, she remarked, setting the tray on a nearby table. Emma deserved to meet her mother. Robert nodded thoughtfully. I think we all deserve a second chance, don't we? Me, Catherine, even Jessica. Especially when children are involved, agreed Mrs. Eleanor. After an afternoon of play, when the children were taken inside by Mrs. Eleanor for snacks, Robert and Catherine sat on a garden bench to talk. Thank you for letting me see her, said Catherine, emotional. She's so beautiful, so happy. Very different from how I imagined all these years. I should thank you too, Robert replied, for not fighting for custody, for not making everything harder. Catherine took a deep breath. It wasn't easy to leave, Robert, but you weren't listening to me. You were so obsessed with fixing Emma that you couldn't see the harm you were causing, to me, to yourself, and especially to her. You were right, he admitted humbly, about everything. It took a life lesson from a 4-year-old boy for me to realize that. Catherine smiled, glancing toward the house. Tell me about him. How did Tommy come into your lives? Robert recounted the whole story, from the meeting in Central Park to the latest developments with Jessica. Catherine listened intently, sometimes laughing, sometimes with tears in her eyes. It's amazing how much a child can teach us, she remarked when he finished. And now? What happens when Jessica comes back into his life? We're taking every precaution, Robert explained. We want it to be a gradual reintroduction without trauma. Mrs. Eleanor will always be present, and Jessica knows Tommy will keep living here. What about us? Catherine asked cautiously. I mean, me and Emma. Can I keep visiting her? Of course, Robert replied without hesitation. In fact, I was thinking, maybe you'd like to spend more time with her, maybe. Maybe you'd like to come back. Catherine looked at him, surprised. Come back, you mean? I'm not suggesting we pick up our marriage again, Robert clarified quickly. I think we've both changed too much for that, but you could have your own space here, to be close to Emma. Catherine considered the offer, visibly moved. It's tempting, she admitted. But I need to think. I've built a life in Paris these past years. Of course, no pressure, Robert assured her. It's just a possibility. Sunday arrived, bringing with it the meeting between Tommy and his mother. Jessica arrived punctually, dressed simply but elegantly. She seemed nervous, more vulnerable than in their previous encounters. Tommy had been prepared all morning by Mrs. Eleanor and Robert. They explained again who was coming to visit him, but reassured him repeatedly that he wouldn't be leaving, that he'd keep living there with them and Emma. When he finally saw his mother, the boy stood still, watching her with a mix of curiosity and hesitation. Jessica, in turn, seemed emotional at the sight of her son. Hi, Tommy, she said, kneeling to his level. Do you remember me? Tommy looked at Mrs. Eleanor as if seeking confirmation. His grandmother nodded encouragingly. A little, he replied timidly. You're my mom, right? Jessica nodded, tears in her eyes. Yes, it's me. You've grown so much. You're so handsome. Tommy didn't run to hug her as she might have expected. Instead, he stayed close to his grandmother, still uncertain. Do you want to meet my friend Emma? He asked after a moment of silence. The question surprised Jessica, who glanced at Robert as if seeking guidance. Of course, she replied, trying to sound cheerful. Tommy took his mother's hand and led her to Emma, who was waiting with Robert a few steps away. Emma, this is my mom, he introduced with the simplicity of children. Mom, this is Emma, my best friend. Jessica smiled at the girl. Hello, Emma. It's a pleasure to meet you. Emma, always shy around strangers, gave a small wave. Hi, she replied, her voice barely a whisper. The lunch passed in a tense but uneventful atmosphere. Jessica tried to engage Tommy in conversation, asking about his games, his likes, and his life in the mansion. The boy answered politely, but kept turning his attention back to Emma, or the adults he was used to. After the meal, Tommy invited Jessica to see his toys in the room he shared with Emma. It was a meaningful gesture, a small opening for his mother into his world. While the children showed Jessica their room, the adults talked in the living room. How is she doing at work? Mrs. Eleanor asked Robert, concerned about her daughter. Surprisingly well, he replied. My HR manager says she's punctual, dedicated, and a quick learner. She seems truly committed. Mrs. Eleanor sighed, relieved and hopeful. Maybe she really wants to change. People can change, commented Catherine, who had been invited to lunch at Robert's request. I changed. Robert changed. We've all changed, Robert agreed. The question is whether we're changing for the better. When Jessica returned with the children, there was a new light in her eyes. Something had happened in that room. Some connection had begun to form. Thank you for today, she said as she prepared to leave. Can I come back next week? Of course, Robert replied. Actually, we were thinking of a trip to the zoo next Sunday. Maybe you'd like to join us. The invitation clearly surprised Jessica, who hadn't expected to be included in family plans so quickly. I'd love to, she accepted, moved. Thank you so much. As they watched Jessica leave, Mrs. Eleanor allowed herself a small, hopeful smile. I think today was a good start, she remarked. Yes, it was, Robert agreed, for all of us. The following weeks brought a series of adjustments and new arrangements. Catherine decided to extend her stay in the US, renting an apartment near the mansion to visit Emma regularly. Jessica remained steady in her job and visited Tommy every Sunday, gradually building a relationship with her son. Emma continued to make surprising progress. She now used her walker with confidence and even attempted a few steps completely on her own. Her communication had also improved significantly, and the doctors were impressed with her development. On a sunny afternoon, while the children played in the garden under Mrs. Eleanor's watchful eye, Robert received an unexpected call. It was a renowned neurologist from New York whom he had consulted months earlier during his obsessive phase of searching for cures for Emma. "Mr. Thompson, I have news about an experimental treatment that could benefit your daughter," the doctor said excitedly. "It's a groundbreaking therapy that has shown promising results in cases like Emma's." Robert listened carefully, but something had shifted inside him. "Doctor, I really appreciate you reaching out, but Emma is making wonderful progress with conventional physical therapy, and most importantly with the social and emotional stimulation she's receiving. I understand your hesitation, but this treatment could significantly speed up her recovery," the doctor insisted. "Emma doesn't need to be cured or sped up," Robert replied with a conviction that would have surprised his former self. "She's moving forward at her own pace, happy and loved, and that's all that matters right now." After hanging up, Robert grew thoughtful. How had he changed so much in such a short time? The answer was right in front of him, in the garden. Tommy, the boy who had entered their lives by chance and with his simple generosity, had taught them all a profound lesson about what truly matters. That evening, after the children were asleep, Robert gathered all the adults in the living room, Mrs. Elizabeth, Catherine, and even Jessica, who had been invited for a special dinner. "I wanted to share something with you," he began, slightly nervous. "Today I got a call from a specialist in New York offering an experimental treatment for Emma." Catherine immediately tensed, remembering Robert's old obsessions. "And what did you say?" she asked cautiously. To her surprise, Robert smiled. "I said no. I told them Emma is making wonderful progress just as she is, happy and loved. And I realized something important. We spend so much time trying to fix our lives, searching for magic solutions, that we forget to simply live." He looked at each of them with gratitude. "What's happened here in this house over the past few months, it's something no medical treatment could ever provide. It's been a meeting of wounded souls who together have begun to heal." Mrs. Elizabeth smiled, moved. "Funny how life works, isn't it? Who would have thought my grandson, a poor boy raised on the streets, would completely change the life of a powerful businessman? And that the son of the maid you fired decades ago would become the father of the child who saved your granddaughter," Robert added, referring to the fact that Brian, Mrs. Elizabeth's son, was Tommy's father. Catherine, who had been filled in on the whole story, shook her head in amazement at the coincidences. "Seems the universe has a peculiar sense of humor," she remarked. Jessica, who had stayed quiet until then, spoke with emotion in her voice and an endless capacity to give second chances. "To all of us." Robert raised his glass in a toast. "To second chances, then, and to the lessons we learn from children." 6 months had passed since that night. The mansion on the Upper East Side, once a cold and sterile place, had been completely transformed. The windows that used to stay shut were now always open, letting in light and fresh air. The halls, once silent, now echoed with laughter and conversation. Emma had surprised everyone with her progress. She could now walk with just a little support and spoke more clearly each day. The doctors, once pessimistic, now called it an extraordinary case of recovery. Tommy had started preschool, proving to be a bright and sociable student. His relationship with Jessica was gradually strengthening, with regular visits and occasional weekends at his mother's place. She now lived in a comfortable apartment bought with her own salary. Catherine had finally decided to return to the US permanently. She bought a house near the mansion and shared custody of Emma with Robert in a friendly arrangement that benefited their daughter most of all. Mrs. Elizabeth remained the mansion's housekeeper, but more than that, she was the heart of this unusual family that had formed. Her wisdom and kindness kept everyone together, even in difficult times. As for Robert, the transformation was evident to anyone who knew him before. The rigid, obsessive man had given way to a present and affectionate father, a loyal friend, and a more compassionate human being. He had significantly reduced his workload to spend more time with Emma, and had started a foundation to help children with conditions similar to hers, giving them access to treatments and, most importantly, opportunities for socialization and emotional development. One Sunday afternoon, as everyone gathered for an outdoor lunch in the garden, Robert watched the children playing. Emma, now walking with a colorful cane, and Tommy, always by her side, ready to help if she stumbled. "What are you thinking about?" Catherine asked, sitting beside him. About how much has changed, he replied with a serene smile. And how sometimes we need the most unexpected people to teach us the most important lessons. At that moment, Emma fell while trying to run. Before any adult could react, Tommy was already by her side, helping her up. "It's okay, Emma," he said in his childlike voice. "Everyone falls. The important thing is to get up and try again." Robert and Catherine exchanged emotional glances. That small moment perfectly captured the journey they had all taken together. "You're absolutely right, Tommy," Robert agreed, walking over to the children. "The important thing is to get up and try again, always." As Emma stood up, determined to keep playing despite the fall, Robert felt a deep gratitude for that. Little boy who, with a simple act of sharing his bread, had taught them all the true meaning of generosity, acceptance, and unconditional love. That night, after a day full of joy and connection, Robert tucked Emma into bed. The little girl, exhausted from playing, looked up at her father with her big, bright eyes. "Daddy, I love Tommy," she said sleepily. "He's my best friend forever." "I know, sweetheart," Robert replied, stroking her hair. "We're very lucky to have him in our lives, aren't we?" Emma nodded, her eyes already closing. "He gave me bread when I was sad, and now I'm never sad again." The girl's simple words struck Robert deeply. It was true. Since Tommy had entered their lives, the sadness that once hung over the mansion had disappeared, replaced by a genuine joy that grew stronger every day. "Sleep well, my princess," he whispered, kissing her forehead. "Tomorrow will be another wonderful day." As he left the room, he found Eleanor in the hallway. "Is she asleep?" the elderly woman asked. "Yes, worn out from all the playing," Robert replied with a smile. "Eleanor, I never properly thanked you for everything you and Tommy have done for us." The older woman shook her head, dismissing the thanks. "There's no need. It was fate that brought us together again after all these years, maybe to fix the mistakes of the past. Or to show us it's never too late to change," Robert added. "To start over." Eleanor smiled, her wise eyes shining with restrained emotion. "You know, when I saw you in that park yelling at my grandson, I thought you were just like your mother. Hard, inflexible, caring only about appearances and status." "And I was," Robert admitted. "But then I saw something that made me question everything. I saw my daughter smile for the first time in weeks, all because of a piece of bread offered by a boy who had almost nothing." "Tommy has always had so much to give," Eleanor said, proudly. "Not in material things, but in generosity of spirit. The only thing that truly matters in the end," Robert agreed. "Isn't the hardest lesson to learn for someone who spent their whole life believing money could solve any problem." They fell silent for a moment, each lost in their own thoughts. "Good night, Robert," Mrs. Eleanor finally said, heading to her apartment. "Tomorrow will be a new day." "A new day and a new life," he replied with gratitude. The next morning, the mansion awoke with the vibrant energy that now defined it. Tommy was the first to rise, eager for another day of playing with Emma. The girl soon followed, determined to practice her steps without the cane. Breakfast was served in the garden, something unthinkable under the old household rules. Catherine had arrived early, bringing homemade cakes. Jessica was also there, as it was Sunday, her visiting day. Robert watched the scene with a full heart. His daughter, happy and increasingly independent. Tommy, the boy who had changed everything with a simple act of kindness. The women who were now part of this unconventional family. Mrs. Eleanor with her wisdom, Catherine with her rediscovered maternal love, Jessica with her determination to start anew. "What are you thinking about, Dad?" Emma asked, noticing his distant gaze. Robert smiled, pulling his daughter onto his lap. "I'm thinking about how blessed we are, my love. How life sometimes surprises us in the most unexpected ways. Like when Tommy gave me bread," she asked with childlike simplicity. "Exactly," Robert agreed, looking gratefully at the boy enthusiastically eating a slice of cake. "Sometimes the simplest thing can change everything." And as the sun bathed this makeshift family gathered around a garden table, Robert knew with certainty that he had found something all his money could never buy. The true meaning of family, acceptance, and unconditional love. All thanks to a small act of kindness from a boy who, even with so little, was willing to share. The end of the story. Dear listener, if this story touched your heart, share in the comments what moved you most. Tommy's simple gesture changed many lives. Your like and subscription could do the same for our channel. We look forward to hearing your thoughts.